The name Alejandro Magno, Alexander the Great, resonates through the centuries, a singular, massive force that shattered the boundaries of the ancient world. But before the legend, before the conquests that stretched from Greece to the distant Indus River, there was a boy born under the complicated, demanding roof of the Macedonian royal family. To truly understand the man who sought to conquer the entire world, we must first travel back to the tempestuous crucible of his youth. The story begins in the year 356 before the Common Era, in the northern Greek kingdom of Macedonia. The location itself, the capital city of Pella, was a place caught between the sophisticated city-states of the south, like Athens and Sparta, and the fierce, less civilized tribes of the north. This tension between Hellenic culture and Macedonian pragmatism would define the soul of the young prince. His father was Felipe II, King of Macedonia, a figure of tremendous, relentless ambition. Felipe was a brilliant, pragmatic statesman and a military innovator who transformed Macedonia from a minor kingdom into the dominant power in the Greek world. He was a master of diplomacy, a strategist who understood the power of the Macedonian phalanx, a dense, bristling formation of soldiers armed with the long, fearsome spear known as the sarissa. Felipe's legacy was one of military efficiency and political dominance, a constant drive to unify the fractious Greek city-states under Macedonian hegemony. He was preparing a vast army for the grandest project yet conceived, the invasion and conquest of the massive Persian Empire. Alejandro was born to inherit an army, an ambition, and a kingdom forged in the fire of conquest. But if Felipe represented the practical, calculating side of power, Alejandro's mother, Olympia, represented the passionate, mystical, and utterly ruthless side. Olympia was a princess from Epiro, a region often considered semi-barbaric by the Athenians. She was fiercely devoted to non-Macedonian cults, particularly the ecstatic, snake-handling worship of Dionysus. Olympia was intensely, even dangerously, ambitious for her son. She constantly sought to distance Alejandro from his father's other wives and their potential rival heirs, often creating a volatile, paranoid atmosphere in the royal court. Olympia reportedly fueled Alejandro's ego with mystical stories, suggesting his true father was not the mortal King Felipe, but the mighty Greek god Zeus. This mythos, this suggestion of divine lineage, planted a seed of destiny in the young prince's mind that would blossom into his world-shattering ambition. The relationship between Alejandro and his father was one of complex and powerful tension. Alejandro admired Felipe's genius, but resented his womanizing, his constant need to take new wives for political alliances, and the overshadowing nature of his massive achievements. Felipe, in turn, recognized his son's potential, but worried about his impulsive temperament and the intense, possessive influence of Olympia. This domestic dynamic created a young man driven by a profound, consuming need to prove himself superior to the towering legacy of his own father. The emotional trauma and the high stakes of succession were a constant daily presence in the life of the prince. It was not enough for Alejandro to be a king. He had to be greater than the man who made him king. Recognizing the need to temper this fiery, volatile nature, King Felipe made one of the most consequential educational decisions in human history. In 343 before the Common Era, he summoned the philosopher Aristotle to the Macedonian court. Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the ancient world, was the student of Plato and the future founder of the Lyceum in Athens. Felipe offered Aristotle a massive reward and commissioned a temple-like school, the Nymphaeum at Mieza, specifically for the education of Alejandro and a carefully selected group of young Macedonian nobles who would become his future generals and companions. For approximately 3 years, from the age of 13 to 16, Alejandro absorbed the finest education the ancient world could offer. Aristotle did not teach only rhetoric and politics. He gave Alejandro a comprehensive grounding in ethics, physics, and medicine. The philosopher instilled in the prince a deep, lifelong passion for scientific investigation and research. It was Aristotle who provided Alejandro with a meticulously annotated copy of Homer's Iliad, a book that Alejandro would carry with him on every campaign, keeping it under his pillow alongside his dagger. The epic of the hero Achilles became more than literature. It was a blueprint for heroic life and the relentless pursuit of glory. Aristotle taught Alejandro that true kingship was not merely about wielding power, but about cultivating virtue and using reason to govern the world. However, a fundamental tension existed between the two men, a philosophical chasm that Alejandro eventually leaped across. Aristotle, a proud Greek, believed in the inherent cultural superiority of the Hellenes and taught that non-Greeks, the barbarians of the East, should be treated as slaves or subjects. Alejandro, the future conqueror and unifier, would ultimately reject this narrow, ethnocentric view, embracing a vision of cultural fusion that would redefine the world. The philosopher gave the prince the intellectual tools and the Greek cultural lens through which he would view the entire planet. But the drive, the ambition, and the sheer, terrifying scale of his subsequent conquests were born from the turbulent palace of Pella, the mystical dreams of his mother, and the overwhelming legacy of his father. The delicate balance of the royal family was violently shattered when King Felipe decided to take a seventh wife, a young Macedonian noblewoman named Cleopatra. At the wedding feast, the bride's uncle, Attilos, made a provocative toast, wishing the king a legitimate heir, an obvious, brutal insult to Olympia, and more importantly, to Alejandro's status as the successor. Alejandro, already drunk and furious, hurled a drinking cup at Attilos, screaming, "Do you take me for a bastard then?" King Felipe rose unsteadily and drew his sword, lunging toward his son, but his drunken stumble allowed his friends to intervene. The incident escalated into a full, irreconcilable break. Alejandro and his mother fled Macedonia, first to Epiro, then to Illyria, where they lived in self-imposed exile, essentially waiting for the inevitable succession battle. Although a temporary political reconciliation was brokered, the distrust remained absolute. The father and son knew they were rivals, their ambitions too large to share the same small kingdom. The ultimate decisive moment arrived in 336 before the Common Era. King Felipe, at the height of his power, was celebrating the wedding of his daughter, Cleopatra, to Olympia's brother. As Felipe walked into the theater, alone for dramatic effect, he was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, Pausanias. The motive for the murder remains one of history's great, unsolved mysteries. Was it a personal vendetta by Pausanias? Was it the vengeful, cold-blooded intrigue of Olympia? Or was it an act orchestrated by the Persian Empire, desperate to stop the imminent invasion? Regardless of the motive, the consequence was immediate and revolutionary. At the age of 20, the volatile, highly educated, and politically isolated Alejandro was thrust onto the throne of Macedonia. He had inherited the greatest army in the world, the plan for the largest invasion in history, and a fractured kingdom eager to test his inexperience. His first act was swift, brutal, and characteristic of the ruthless pragmatism learned from his father. He eliminated all potential rivals to the throne. His claim was secured with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. The boy who was tutored by Aristotle and dreamed of Achilles was now king of Macedonia and the undisputed leader of the Greek world. His path to the east was now clear, but before he could cross the Hellespont, he had to prove to the Greeks that he was worthy of leading them. The massive world his father had prepared for him was finally his to shape or to utterly destroy. The stage was set for the campaign that would change history forever, a journey into the unknown that begins on the far side of the sea. The 20-year-old Alejandro ascended the throne of Macedonia in 336 before the Common Era, inheriting not a peaceful kingdom, but a powder keg. The death of his father, Felipe II, instantly shattered the fragile alliance that held Greece together. The southern city-states, particularly Athens and Thebes, had endured Macedonian rule only out of fear of the pragmatic, battle-scarred Felipe. With the charismatic but untested young king in power, the temptation to revolt and reclaim their cherished independence was overwhelming. Alejandro understood immediately that his grand inherited plan, the invasion of the colossal Persian Empire, could not begin until he had secured absolute, uncontested authority over Greece and the Balkan region. He had to prove that the son was as fearsome as the father, and that the Macedonian will remain unbroken. The northern shadow subduing the tribes. Alejandro's first military campaigns were not against the sophisticated Persians, but against the tough, mountainous tribes to the north of Macedonia, the Thracians and the Illyrians. These tribes, often raiding the Macedonian borders, needed to be decisively crushed to ensure the supply lines and the home front remained secure once the main army crossed into Asia. In a lightning campaign executed in 335 before the Common Era, Alejandro demonstrated his signature speed, daring, and tactical innovation. The Hemus Pass. Against the Thracians, Alejandro encountered a tactical challenge in a narrow mountain pass. The tribesmen planned to roll their heavy wagons down onto the approaching Macedonian phalanx. Alejandro's response was characteristic. He ordered his soldiers not to attempt to stop the wagons, but to open their ranks and let them roll harmlessly through, or to duck under their interlocking shields. He then rapidly deployed his forces and destroyed the disorganized Thracians. The Danube River. His push carried him all the way to the great Danube River, where he engaged the Geti tribes. Utilizing his fleet, he executed a surprise night crossing, demonstrating the combined arms coordination he had learned from his father. This campaign was less about territory and more about psychological impact. He showed his Macedonian troops that their young leader was brilliant, decisive, and fearless, cementing their personal loyalty. The rising of Thebes, a test of resolve. While Alejandro was occupied in the distant north, a dangerous rumor reached the southern Greek cities that Alejandro had been killed in battle. The report, possibly manufactured by anti-Macedonian agitators, was enough to ignite the simmering resentment against Macedonian rule. Thebes, one of the most powerful and historically proud city-states, immediately rose in open revolt. The Thebans slaughtered the small Macedonian garrison stationed in their citadel, the Cadmeia, and called upon all of Greece to join their rebellion. Athens, under the influence of the fierce anti-Macedonian orator Demosthenes, hesitated but provided moral support. This was the true, ultimate test of Alejandro's kingship. If Thebes succeeded, the entire Greek world would erupt behind him, forcing him to abandon the Persian invasion indefinitely and risk the destruction of his inherited kingdom. The response had to be swift, absolute, and terrifying. The absolute destruction of Thebes. Alejandro, hearing the news, executed one of the most astonishing forced marches of the ancient world. In less than 2 weeks, he covered the nearly 500 kilometers from Illyria to the gates of Thebes, catching the rebels completely off guard. The speed of his arrival debunked the rumors of his death and struck immediate fear into the hearts of the Athenians, who instantly withdrew their support. Alejandro initially offered the Thebans a chance to surrender and accept exile for the revolt's leaders. The Thebans, confident in their defensive walls and historical prowess, arrogantly refused. The siege and assault. The resulting siege was short and brutal. Macedonian forces, driven by the need to make an example, breached the walls. The ensuing battle was not merely a military victory, it was a massacre. The Macedonian army, enraged by the Theban slaying of their comrades in the citadel, fought without restraint. The verdict of the League. Following the capture of the city, Alejandro called a council of his Greek allies, the members of the League of Corinth. The council, dominated by Macedonian influence but nominally autonomous, delivered a horrific verdict. The city of Thebes was to be razed to the ground. The execution of the verdict. The order was carried out with chilling thoroughness. Every public building, every wall, and every house in Thebes was destroyed, except for the temples and, crucially, the house of the revered lyric poet Pindaro, whom Alejandro admired. Over 6,000 Thebans were killed in the fighting, and the surviving 30,000 citizens, men, women, and children, were sold into slavery. The psychological aftermath. The destruction of Thebes was a calculated act of strategic terror. It sent a blood-chilling, undeniable message throughout the Greek world. Rebellion against Alejandro means total annihilation. The city-states of Greece, including the hesitant Athens, were stunned into absolute submission. They immediately sent delegations offering elaborate apologies and confirming their loyalty to the young king. The great, historic power of Thebes, which had once battled Sparta and Athens, was wiped off the map, its very existence erased from the physical world. Alejandro had now achieved what his father had always strived for, the complete, uncontested control of the Greek mainland. With the home front quieted by fear and the Macedonian army eager for plunder and glory, the path was finally open for the grand, inherited project, the long-anticipated invasion of the Persian Empire. This vast, wealthy realm had been the great antagonist of Greece for over a century, and now Alejandro was ready to fulfill the destiny set forth by his father. The final preparations. Returning to Pella, Alejandro completed his administrative arrangements. He left the skilled General Antipatro in charge of Macedonia and Greece, armed with a formidable army of 12,000 men to ensure that the quiet submission remained absolute. In the spring of 334 before the Common Era, Alejandro mustered his forces at Sesto on the European side of the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Europe from Asia. He commanded an army of approximately 48,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, a highly trained, battle-hardened, and fiercely loyal multinational force. He was crossing not merely a sea, but a threshold. He was leaving behind the confines of the Greek world, with its complicated politics and small kingdoms, for the limitless expanse of Asia, the world's most powerful empire. He carried no grand strategic map detailing the path to the Indus. He carried only Homer's Iliad, his dagger, and an unshakable belief in his own divine destiny. His landing on Asian soil would be an act of profound, almost religious symbolism, marking the beginning of a relentless 10-year campaign that would permanently merge the East and West. The small world of Greece was now too small for the ambition of Alejandro Magno. The final separation was coming, a moment that marked the transition from Macedonian king to world conqueror, a transition sealed by the waters of the Hellespont. The next stage would see the legendary confrontation with the massive Persian machine, a confrontation that started with the first clash on the banks of the Rio Granico. The moment had arrived. The preparations were complete. The army was hardened, and the Greek world lay subdued in the shadow of the terror of Thebes. The vast undertaking inherited from his father, Felipe II, was now solely in the hands of the 22-year-old Alejandro. The line that separated the Greek world from the boundless wealth and power of the Persian Empire was the narrow, swift-flowing strait known as the Hellespont, the act of symbolic conquest. In the spring of 334 before the Common Era, Alejandro began the crossing of the Hellespont. This was not merely a logistical movement of troops. It was a deeply significant act of religious and political theater. He left the main force to cross the strait on triremes and transport ships, but Alejandro himself performed a separate, highly symbolic journey. He sailed ahead on his own flagship, making a profound declaration of his intentions the moment he touched Asian soil, the spear and the oath. As his ship neared the Asian shore, Alejandro performed a dramatic ritual. He hurled his spear from the deck and watched it plunge into the earth of Asia Minor. This act was a claim of ownership. By throwing the spear, he declared that the land he was about to step upon was not being conquered, but was being rightfully taken, a gift from the gods to him. The tomb of Achilles. His first official act upon landing was to travel to the ruins of Troy. This was the legendary setting of the Iliad, the epic poem that had been his personal guide and intellectual blueprint since his tutelage under Aristotle. He and his lifelong companion, Hephaestion, visited the tomb of Achilles, his heroic ancestor and role model. Alejandro anointed the tomb with oil and paid homage, publicly aligning himself not merely with Macedonian kings, but with the mythological heroes of Greek history, the claim to retribution. The entire operation was presented not as an invasion, but as a retribution. Alejandro declared his campaign was revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece over a century earlier, when the Persian king Jerjes had sacked Athens. By invoking the heroic past and the ancient grievance, Alejandro transformed a war of Macedonian conquest into a pan-Hellenic crusade to liberate the Greeks of Asia Minor from Persian rule, the response of the satraps. The presence of a massive Macedonian army on Asian soil demanded an immediate Persian response. The western part of the Persian Empire was governed by powerful regional rulers called satraps. These satraps, all formidable military commanders in their own right, gathered their forces to block Alejandro's advance. The Persian defense force consisted primarily of the satrap's heavy cavalry and a sizable contingent of Greek mercenary hoplites. It was a testament to the fractured nature of the Greek world that many professional Greek soldiers, valuing pay over patriotism, were willing to fight for the Persian gold against the forces of Alejandro. The Persian commanders decided to concentrate their forces at the Rio Granicus River, a relatively small but strategically important river near the ancient city of Dacilio. Their plan was sound. Use their superior cavalry to hold the high western bank of the river, forcing Alejandro to execute a difficult, disorganized crossing under a barrage of arrows and spears. The Battle of the Rio Granico, 334 before the Common Era, Alejandro arrived at the Rio Granico and immediately encountered the Persian forces deployed along the high bank. His general, Parmenion, a seasoned veteran of Felipe's campaigns, advised caution. He urged Alejandro to wait until dawn the next day, arguing that crossing a river at dusk under heavy fire was a severe violation of military prudence. Alejandro rejected this counsel with characteristic impatience and audacious confidence. He declared that to wait would be an insult to the Hellespont, which he had crossed in a single leap. The true reason for his haste was psychological. He needed to strike immediately to shatter Persian confidence and prevent their deployment of reinforcements. The tactical gambit, Alejandro's plan, was daring and relied heavily on the personal shock of his presence. He launched a diversionary attack on the Persian center and left flank, creating confusion. He then personally led his elite companion cavalry in a massive diagonal charge across the river toward the strongest point of the Persian line, where the commanders themselves were located. The chaos of the crossing. The crossing was sheer chaos. The Macedonian soldiers, struggling through the water, were immediately met by a devastating hail of arrows and spears. It was during this desperate, close-quarters fighting that the legend of Alejandro's personal bravery was forged. The near-fatal encounter. In the thick of the melee, Alejandro charged directly at the Persian commanders. He fought hand-to-hand, striking down 2 Persian satraps. However, a third Persian nobleman, Espitridates, aimed a powerful blow at Alejandro's head with a scimitar. The blow sheared off the crest of Alejandro's helmet and left a deep gouge in the metal, but did not penetrate. Alejandro was seconds from death. Cleto's intervention. At that precise, critical moment, Cleto the Black, one of the most trusted Macedonian officers, intervened. Cleto used his own sword to slice off Espitridates' arm, saving Alejandro's life. This personal rescue would be remembered by both men, creating a bond of life debt that would later have tragic consequences. The outcome and the footprint in Asia. The battle was brief and devastatingly conclusive. Once Alejandro's personal charge broke the initial line, the Persian cavalry faltered and fled. The Greek mercenaries fighting for Persia, left exposed by the fleeing cavalry, were surrounded. Alejandro ordered a swift, brutal slaughter of the Greek mercenary ranks, sparing only a few thousand who were immediately sent back to Macedonia as slaves. This was a second chilling message to the Greek world. Service to the Persians will be punished ruthlessly. The victory at the Rio Granico achieved far more than a simple military triumph. Financial gain: Alejandro captured the entire western treasury of the Persian satraps, immediately funding his campaign and eliminating the desperate need for quick plunder. Psychological shift: the Persian commanders, confident in their numbers and tactical position, were stunned by the audacity and speed of the Macedonian attack. They realized they were not facing an ordinary invader, but a force led by a commander who defied conventional military logic. The key to Asia Minor: the path to the Aegean coast and the wealthy strategic cities of Asia Minor was now open. The victory secured Alejandro's essential first foothold on the Asian continent. Alejandro had now confirmed his divine destiny in the eyes of his men and the Greek world. He had faced down the greatest empire on earth and won the first round, defying the cautious advice of his most trusted general. He was no longer just the young, untested successor of Felipe. He was the undisputed commander of the Hellenic world and the new master of Western Asia Minor. The invasion had begun. The next phase would be the long, complex process of liberating and consolidating the wealthy, culturally diverse cities of the coast, preparing the ground for the inevitable, massive confrontation with the Persian king himself. The campaign had transitioned from a lightning strike to a sustained war of occupation and cultural merging. The coast of Asia Minor beckoned, a vast, wealthy land filled with ancient cities and formidable fortresses, and Alejandro's philosophy of war and empire was about to be put to the test in the complex, walled cities of the East. The slow march toward the heart of the Persian domain was just beginning. The march through Asia Minor: fortresses, funds, and the Gordian knot. With the victory at the Rio Granico secured, Alejandro Magno gained his essential foothold on the Asian continent. The nature of his war now shifted. It transitioned from a single, decisive battle into a long, patient process of occupation and consolidation. His immediate objective was clear: to march down the western coast of Asia Minor, liberating the Greek cities, conquering the Persian-held fortresses, and most crucially, denying the vast Persian navy access to its harbors and financial support. The strategy of the coast: the Persian Empire was a colossal entity, rich in resources and possessing an immense fleet that dominated the Aegean Sea. Alejandro's small army, cut off from reliable supply lines back in Greece, faced a logistical nightmare. The most effective way to neutralize the Persian naval threat was not by fighting it at sea, an impossible task given the disparity in ships, but by conquering its bases on land. Every captured port meant the Persian fleet had one less place to resupply, refit, and collect taxes, gradually strangling their capacity to operate. Sardis: the key to the interior. Alejandro's first major acquisition after the battle was the city of Sardis, the ancient, immensely wealthy capital of the Lydian kingdom and a crucial inland hub. Its governor, unnerved by the speed and audacity of the Macedonian victory, immediately surrendered the city and its immense treasury. This bloodless victory gave Alejandro immediate, massive funding for his campaign and secured a vital line of communication into the Asian interior. Miletus and Halicarnassus: the sieges. The campaign then turned to the coastal fortresses. The cities of Miletus and Halicarnassus were heavily defended by strong Persian and Greek mercenary garrisons. Miletus: Alejandro captured Miletus quickly, sending a clear message that resistance was futile. Halicarnassus: This siege proved to be a far more difficult, brutal affair. The defense was led by Memnon of Rhodos, a brilliant Greek mercenary commander in the service of the Persian king. Memnon understood the Macedonian phalanx and implemented a fierce, creative defense that cost the Macedonians dearly in blood and time. The long siege showed Alejandro that not all Persian resistance would crumble quickly. Though he eventually captured the city, he realized the war would be long and difficult, confirming the quality of the Persian defense could be formidable when led by skilled commanders. The liberation and the loot. As Alejandro marched down the coast, he played the part of the liberator to the Greek cities he encountered. He restored democratic governments in these cities, abolishing the Persian taxes and re-establishing their ancient religious practices. This carefully crafted policy was essential. It secured the loyalty of the Greek population in Asia Minor and validated his initial declaration that the campaign was a crusade of liberation, not merely one of Macedonian conquest. However, the campaign was not purely altruistic. The wealth and resources flowing into the Macedonian camp were vast. The conquest of the western satrapies was providing the financial muscle necessary to sustain an army far from home, allowing Alejandro to pay his troops well and fund the continued grinding effort of the war machine. The psychological breakthrough, the Gordian knot. After securing the coast, Alejandro turned inland, marching toward the ancient region of Phrygia. His path led him to the city of Gordium, which was known not for its military strength, but for its legend. In the temple of Zeus in Gordio, a fascinating ancient artifact was housed, a cart secured to a post by a complex tangled knot woven from cornel bark. This was the famous Gordian knot. The ancient oracle attached to this knot stated that the man who could successfully unravel the intricate knot would become the master of all Asia. This prophecy had stood for centuries, defying all attempts by travelers, kings, and scholars to untangle the impossible mesh of cord. This was a classic clash between superstition and destiny, and Alejandro, always keenly attuned to the psychological power of myth and symbol, understood the moment's importance. He arrived at the temple surrounded by his generals, priests, and the local populace, all eager to witness his attempt at the impossible task. The challenge, Alejandro studied the knot, observing the impossibility of tracing its ends. The traditional methods of patient, careful unwinding demanded by the prophecy were proving fruitless. The decisive action. According to the most popular account of the event, Alejandro drew his sword and with a single swift motion sliced through the knot, severing the cord and instantly fulfilling the prophecy. The interpretation. His action was a profound, defining statement about his approach to life and conquest. He demonstrated that he was not bound by the traditions, limitations, or convoluted rules that governed other men. He did not seek to solve the riddle in the conventional way. He redefined the rules entirely. The prophecy did not say the knot had to be unraveled. It only said it had to be mastered. He mastered it through action and decision. The moment cemented Alejandro's personal mythos among his troops and the people of Asia. It confirmed that he was the fated conqueror, a man who did not respect obstacles but simply destroyed them. The act was a perfect blend of practical efficiency, a quick solution, and supernatural confirmation, fulfilling an ancient prophecy, proving that his destiny was one of radical, uncompromising action. The impending clash. With the knot severed and the symbolic victory complete, Alejandro moved on. He had spent nearly 2 years securing Asia Minor, transforming it into a secure Macedonian base of operations. The small skirmishing battles were over. Meanwhile, the king of Persia, Dario III, Darius III, was not idle. He was the undisputed ruler of an empire that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus, and he commanded the wealth of the civilized world. Dario was massing an army of a size that dwarfed anything Alejandro had yet faced, an army of true imperial magnitude, drawn from dozens of different nations and provinces, backed by vast treasuries. Alejandro knew that a true, decisive battle for the control of Asia was inevitable. He could no longer rely on lightning strikes and shock tactics. He would have to face the concentrated might of the Persian king's central power. The stage was set for the second, definitive clash, the great confrontation between the God-inspired young conqueror and the King of Kings himself. The slow, patient march had done its work, and the moment for massive, terrifying engagement was fast approaching. The invasion now turned eastward toward the vast open plains of Cilicia, where the great armies of East and West would finally meet. The campaign had moved past preparation and symbolism and now approached the terrifying reality of total war. Having symbolically mastered his destiny by cutting the Gordian knot and securing the lucrative coast of Asia Minor, Alejandro Magno now pressed eastward. The skirmishes and sieges were over. Ahead lay the true test of his campaign, the inevitable, direct confrontation with Dario III, the King of Kings and the undisputed ruler of the Persian Empire. The march to Cilicia, Alejandro led his army south into Cilicia, a coastal region bridging Asia Minor and the Levant. This march was fraught with early challenges, including illness which temporarily incapacitated Alejandro, and the difficulty of supplying his army through the Cilician Gates, a narrow, easily defended mountain pass. It was during this time that the grand strategies of both empires began to collide. Dario's preparations. Dario III was not a weak king, but he was accustomed to commanding by decree, relying on the sheer size and spectacle of his imperial forces. He had mustered an army of staggering scale, drawing troops from dozens of satrapies, a massive, colorful force that ancient sources claim numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Dario carried with him the imperial treasures and the entire royal court, including his mother, Sisigambis, his wife, Estateira, and his young daughters. This made his camp not just a military center, but the nerve center of the entire Persian world. The flank maneuver. Initially, Dario intended to meet Alejandro on the vast open plains of Syria, where his immense cavalry could be deployed to full, devastating effect. However, a major miscalculation occurred. As Alejandro moved south along the coast toward Isso, Dario, advancing from the opposite direction, somehow managed to cross the mountains inland of Alejandro's position, placing the enormous Persian army behind the Macedonian forces. This maneuver was both a tactical disaster for Dario and a stroke of fortune for Alejandro. Dario now stood between the Macedonian army and its communication lines, cutting off their retreat. But more importantly, the confrontation would now occur not on the open plains Dario desired, but in the narrow, restrictive coastal plain of Isso. The Battle of Isso, 333 before the Common Era. The Battle of Isso took place on a narrow strip of land sandwiched between the Golfo de Isso and the steep Amanus Mountains. This geographical constraint was the decisive factor of the battle, immediately neutralizing Dario's greatest advantage, the numerical superiority and breadth of his cavalry. Alejandro, facing the challenge of turning his relatively smaller force to confront the enemy now positioned behind him, deployed his army with meticulous precision, deployment, and constraints. The narrow battlefield meant that the Macedonian phalanx could form a solid, unbroken front that entirely filled the space between the sea and the mountains. Dario could not utilize the flanks, forcing his hundreds of thousands of troops into a crowded, inefficient formation where depth counted for little and maneuverability was impossible. Alejandro's signature charge. As the Persian forces engaged the Macedonian phalanx in the center, struggling to push through the deadly sarissas, Alejandro executed his signature move. He personally led the companion cavalry in a ferocious charge on the Macedonian right flank, driving hard into the Persian left, where the ground was slightly firmer toward the foothills. The thrust at the king. The charge was not aimed at the enemy's formation, but directly at the Persian king himself. In the tradition of the Macedonian army, the goal was not merely to break the line, but to target the command structure. The Persian center, consisting of Dario's elite immortals and Greek mercenaries, fought fiercely, but the terrifying sight of Alejandro's wedge formation cutting toward the royal chariot proved too much for the Persian nerve. The flight of Dario and the collapse of the army. The central moment of the battle arrived when Alejandro's charge punched through the line and came within visual range of Dario's chariot. Dario III, facing the sight of the Macedonian king, helmeted and spear-wielding, charging directly at him, made a decision that sealed the fate of the battle and his empire. He fled. The immediate consequence, Dario's flight, was not just a retreat, it was the total disintegration of the command structure. His vast multinational army relied absolutely on the visible presence of the King of Kings for its cohesion and morale. When the royal chariot turned and sped away from the battlefield, the massive Persian center immediately dissolved into panic. The rout and pursuit. What followed was a massacre. The narrow coastal plain, which had constrained the Persian forces during the battle, now became a deadly bottleneck during the rout. The fleeing Persian troops, unable to escape into the mountains or the sea, were trapped by the pursuing Macedonian cavalry. The Persian army, despite its overwhelming numbers, was utterly annihilated as a fighting force. The capture of the royal family. The most significant, long-lasting consequence of the Battaglia de Isso was not the military victory, but the capture of the Persian royal family. In their haste, Dario's retinue abandoned the main royal encampment and the massive imperial treasury. When Alejandro's forces swept through the camp, they found Dario's mother, Sisigambis, his wife, Estettira, and his 2 daughters. Alejandro's clemency. This moment offered Alejandro an opportunity to solidify his image as a civilized philosophical conqueror, a stark contrast to the brutal image of the conquering Macedonian. When presented with the weeping, distraught royal women, Alejandro treated them with extraordinary respect and clemency. He ordered that they be protected, assured them of their safety and honor, and refused to allow them to be humiliated or harmed, a gesture that went against the brutal norms of ancient warfare, the psychological victory. This act of respect was a profound stroke of psychological warfare. It earned Alejandro the fierce, lifelong loyalty of Sisigambis, Dario's mother. By treating the royal family not as captives, but as guests, Alejandro subtly positioned himself as the true, superior successor to the Persian throne, demonstrating that he possessed the virtue and dignity that Dario lacked. He was proving himself worthy not just of Macedonian rule, but of universal sovereignty. The path diverted the Phoenician coast. The victory at Isso was total. Dario had lost his army, his royal family, his treasury, and crucially, his prestige. The entire eastern Mediterranean now lay open to Alejandro. However, Alejandro did not immediately pursue the fleeing Dario toward the heart of the Persian Empire. Instead, he made a calculated, strategic decision to divert his campaign south, marching down the Phoenician coast toward Egypto. The Persian fleet, though demoralized, was still a serious threat. Its final source of support lay in the wealthy, powerful Phoenician city-states, especially Tiro, Tyre, and Gaza. Alejandro knew that he could not march inland and risk being cut off from the sea and undermined by Persian naval power. He had to conquer every single port on the eastern Mediterranean, thereby destroying the Persian fleet's operating capacity forever. The campaign was about to transition into a new, grinding phase of siege warfare, culminating in the legendary, seemingly impossible engineering challenge of the Siege of Tiro. The road to total empire was paved not just with cavalry charges, but with monumental earthworks and the indomitable will to conquer the sea itself. The journey to the heart of the Persian world had been momentarily delayed by the demands of absolute strategic security. Conquering the sea and founding the future, Tiro, Gaza, and Egypto. The decisive victory at the Battaglia de Isso shattered the main Persian army and sent King Dario III fleeing eastward. Yet Alejandro Magno chose not to pursue the king immediately. Instead, he turned his army south, recognizing that true, lasting conquest required total strategic control. His next objective was the Phoenician coast and in the wealthy kingdom of Egypto, Egypt. The challenge of Tiro, challenging the sea. The key to the Persian naval power lay in the ancient, formidable Phoenician cities. Chief among these was Tiro, Tyre, the greatest trading city of the eastern Mediterranean. Tiro was not on the mainland. It was built on an island fortress, situated nearly a kilometer offshore, protected by massive walls and the deep, challenging waters of the sea. Alejandro demanded the city's surrender and the use of its port. The Tyrians, confident in their defenses and their naval superiority, refused. They were prepared to resist indefinitely, believing that no army, however great, could conquer the sea. The impossible solution, the mole. Alejandro viewed this defiance not merely as a military obstacle, but as a personal insult to his destiny. He decided on a solution that was both monumental and impossible. He would conquer the sea itself. He ordered the construction of a massive, kilometer-long causeway, or mole, to bridge the gap between the mainland and the island city. The engineering feat. For 7 grinding months, his army, utilizing timber, rock, and rubble from abandoned mainland cities, toiled to build this structure. The project was relentless, attacked constantly by Tyrian fire ships and the unpredictable fury of the waves. The Tyrians were masters of naval warfare and used every ingenuity, from harassing the workers to deploying naval forces, to prevent the causeway from completion. The turning point. The siege dragged on. testing the patience and morale of the Macedonian army. The ultimate breakthrough came when Alejandro successfully mustered his own fleet by coercing ships from the recently conquered coastal cities Sidon, Rhodes, Chipre. This newly assembled Hellenic fleet neutralized the Tyrian navy, allowing the causeway to be completed and siege engines to be deployed directly against the colossal seawalls. The conquest. When the city finally fell in 332 before the Common Era, after the most costly and grueling siege of Alejandro's career, his wrath was terrible. The city was almost entirely destroyed, and thousands of Tyrians were executed or sold into slavery. The fate of Tiro served as the ultimate chilling lesson. Alejandro's will was absolute, and even the sea would not stop him. The road to Egypto, Gaza, and the strategic goal. Following the conquest of Tiro, the next obstacle was the fortress city of Gaza, the gateway to Egypto. Gaza was fiercely defended by the Persian governor, Batis. The siege of Gaza. This siege was another brutal, protracted affair. The city was built on a high mound and strongly fortified. Alejandro, demonstrating his engineering adaptability, built massive siege ramps to reach the height of the walls. After a stubborn defense that cost him heavy losses, Gaza fell. Batis, the Persian commander, refused to submit even after capture. In a rare and disturbing display of personal cruelty, Alejandro reportedly had Batis dragged alive behind a chariot, an act that reflected the brutal revenge displayed by his hero, Achilles, in the Iliad. The strategic importance. The severity of the siege of Gaza was proportional to the importance of the prize that lay beyond, Egypto. By securing the entire coast and Gaza, Alejandro had effectively cut the Persian Empire in two, neutralizing their vast naval threat and securing the rich agricultural wealth of Egypto for his own army. The peaceful conquest of Egypto, 332-331 before the Common Era. Alejandro's entry into Egypto was unlike any conquest before. It was not met with fierce resistance, but with immediate, widespread welcome. The welcoming pharaoh. The Egyptians had long resented the Persian rule, viewing the Achaemenid Persians as foreign occupiers who disrespected their ancient gods and culture. When Alejandro arrived, he was immediately greeted as a liberator and, most importantly, as the rightful pharaoh. Respect for tradition. Alejandro, guided by his understanding of political stability and cultural sensitivity, displayed immense respect for Egyptian religion. He visited the ancient religious capital of Memphis and performed traditional sacrifices to the Egyptian god Apis. He was officially crowned as pharaoh, adopting the ceremonial regalia and titles of the Egyptian kings. This transformation was crucial. He was now seen not as a mere Greek invader, but as the legitimate, divinely sanctioned ruler of one of the world's most ancient civilizations. The founding of Alejandria, the city of the future. During his stay, Alejandro recognized the need for a new capital that would link his vast new empire. He selected a site on the Mediterranean coast, a strategic location facing the sea and the trade routes to the west, and established the city that would bear his name, Alejandria, Alexandria. A global hub, the foundation of Alejandria was arguably the most enduring single act of his life. He personally laid out the city plan, envisioning it as a global hub of trade and culture, a bridge between Greece and the East. The intellectual legacy. Alejandria would not just be a military port. It was destined to become the greatest center of learning in the ancient world, home to the immense library of Alexandria and the museum. This creation fulfilled the intellectual ideals instilled in him by Aristotle, the belief in the spread of Hellenic knowledge and inquiry. Alejandria was a city built for the future, a tangible expression of his commitment to cultural fusion and intellectual expansion. The divine oracle of Siwa. Before leaving Egypto, Alejandro undertook a long, dangerous journey across the vast, burning Libyan desert to visit the remote oasis of Siwa, the site of the ancient oracle of Ammon, Zeus Ammon. Seeking confirmation, this journey was highly symbolic. Alejandro sought divine confirmation of his extraordinary destiny, particularly regarding the stories his mother, Olympia, had whispered to him in childhood about his divine parentage. The pronouncement. When he reached the temple, the chief priest reportedly greeted him, not as Alejandro, but as son of Ammon. This pronouncement was not merely flattery. It was confirmation from one of the most respected spiritual authorities of the ancient world that Alejandro possessed a divine lineage. The official designation of son of Zeus Ammon forever separated Alejandro from the mere mortal kings of the past. The conquest of Egypto and the founding of Alejandria marked a profound transition. Alejandro was no longer just the general seeking revenge. He was the pharaoh, the son of God, the founder of a cultural capital, and the unifier of East and West. He had secured his rear, gained control of immense wealth, and achieved absolute psychological and divine confirmation for the conquest that lay ahead. The time had come to turn back eastward, to pursue the challenge that still stood, Dario III and the untapped might of the Persian heartland. The final showdown, Gaugamela and the conquest of the world, with the entire Mediterranean coast and the wealth of Egypto secured, the path was clear for Alejandro Magno to turn his full attention toward the true purpose of his invasion, the complete overthrow of the Persian Empire. He had neutralized the navy, secured the supplies, and following his visit to the Oracle of Siwa, confirmed his own divine status. Now, he marched eastward into the heart of Mesopotamia, where King Dario III awaited him with the final and largest army of his colossal empire. The Persian preparations, a battlefield chosen. Dario III, having fled the field at Isso, had spent the intervening 2 years gathering every available resource from his vast realm. He knew this confrontation would be the last chance to save his empire. Unlike the confined, restrictive terrain of Isso, Dario chose the battlefield deliberately and prepared it meticulously for his massive force. The open, flat plains near the village of Gaugamela, not far from the ancient city of Arbela. Leveling the field, Dario understood that his greatest asset was sheer numbers, particularly his immense scythe chariots and his vast cavalry. To ensure these forces could operate at peak efficiency, he ordered the ground to be cleared and leveled. He had his engineers remove every hillock, ravine, and irregularity to create a vast, smooth canvas perfect for the Persian charge. The scale of the army. Ancient sources, though often exaggerated, describe an army numbering in the hundreds of thousands, drawing contingents from every corner of the empire. Heavily armored cavalry from Bactria, fierce horsemen from Scythia, Indian archers, and the elite corps of Dario's own Persian and Median infantry. The psychological impact of this enormous, multi-ethnic host was intended to be crushing. The stakes. Dario placed his army on the field with such depth and breadth that it far outflanked the Macedonian forces. He intended to envelop Alejandro's flanks and used the devastating impact of the scythed chariots to break the legendary cohesion of the Macedonian phalanx. The Macedonian advance and the calculated risk. Alejandro's army, though smaller, around 47,000 men, was far more cohesive, disciplined, and battle-hardened than any force Dario could field. However, facing such an overwhelming numerical superiority required genius and nerve, reconnaissance and caution. Unlike his impulsive decision at the Rio Granico, Alejandro showed extreme caution at Gaugamela. He spent days scouting the prepared battlefield, observing the enemy dispositions, and Dario's deliberate preparation of the ground. This meticulous preparation confirmed that Dario was relying entirely on overwhelming the Macedonians with mass and momentum. Parmenion's counsel. On the night before the battle, in 331 before the Common Era, Alejandro's trusted general, Parmenion, urged the king to execute a surprise night attack, arguing that the darkness would neutralize the Persian numbers and the fear they inspired. The bold refusal. Alejandro famously refused, reportedly declaring, "I will not steal the victory." His refusal was deeply calculated. A night battle would have been chaotic, reducing the battle to a confused melee and risking the disintegration of his disciplined forces. Alejandro wanted a clear, undeniable victory won by superior tactical genius and discipline, not by stealth. He intended to fight Dario on his own chosen ground in broad daylight and utterly break the Persian spirit. The Battle of Gaugamela, October 1st, 331 before the Common Era. The battle began at dawn, a terrifying spectacle of movement on the vast plains. Alejandro's strategy was a masterpiece of controlled aggression, reliant on discipline and the personal electrifying leadership of the king. The oblique advance. Alejandro deployed his phalanx in a strong, central line, commanded by Parmenion. Critically, he deployed his whole army in a highly oblique formation, marching diagonally toward the Persian right flank. This was a massive tactical feint, designed to draw the enormous Persian cavalry wings outward, forcing them to overextend their lines and separate from the Persian center. The cavalry duel. As the Macedonians marched, the Persian cavalry, reacting as Dario had planned, surged forward on both flanks in an attempt to envelop Alejandro. The Macedonian flank guards, disciplined infantry battalions, arranged at an angle, forming a refused flank, held back, absorbing the pressure and preventing the Persian encirclement. The Macedonian line bent, but did not break. The scythed chariots. Dario launched his terrifying scythed chariots into the Macedonian center. The Macedonian infantry, trained for this precise moment, reacted with terrifying calmness. They opened their ranks, allowing the chariots to roll harmlessly through, where they were immediately set upon by javelin throwers and horsemen in the rear. The Persian superweapon failed entirely against Macedonian discipline. The decisive thrust. This was the moment Alejandro had created. The Persian line, having stretched and pushed its best cavalry outward to contain the Macedonian advance, now had a critical gap that had opened between the Persian center and the extended left flank, precisely where Dario's personal guard stood. Alejandro wheeled his companion cavalry and his most elite infantry units and charged directly through this gap, aiming straight for Dario. The second flight and the spoils of empire history repeated itself with decisive finality. The Persian collapse, the site of the feared Macedonian wedge, led by the unmistakable figure of Alejandro, Charging into the unprotected Persian center again proved too much for Dario III. The King of Kings fled the field for the second and final time, abandoning his chariot, his family, and his army. The immediate consequence, as at Iso, Dario's flight caused the immediate, irreversible collapse of the entire Persian center. The vast Persian army, lacking a central command and witnessing the betrayal of their king, dissolved into a terrified rout. The left flank crisis. While the Persian center was collapsing, the Macedonian left flank, commanded by Parmenion, came under severe pressure from the massive Persian right flank cavalry. Parmenion sent an urgent plea to Alejandro for assistance. Alejandro, knowing the battle was strategically won, but realizing his most loyal general was in mortal danger, broke off his pursuit of Dario and rode hard back to save his left wing. His timely intervention drove back the remaining Persian cavalry, securing the victory on both wings. The ultimate prize and the strategic aftermath. The victory at Gaugamela was not just a great military achievement, it was the conquest of the Persian Empire, the new master of Asia. The battle shattered the final organized Persian field army. The road to the imperial heartland was now open. Alejandro was no longer an invader. He was the de facto ruler of Asia, the imperial capitals. Alejandro quickly marched south, conquering the administrative and cultural capitals of the Persian Empire, Babylonia, Babylon. He entered this ancient city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator. The Babylonians, who had also resented Persian rule, welcomed him with open arms. Alejandro displayed his usual respect for local customs, ordering the restoration of the great temple of Marduk, securing the loyalty of the powerful Babylonian priesthood, Susa. Next, he captured the royal city of Susa, seizing the legendary imperial treasury, a colossal hoard of gold and silver accumulated over 2 centuries of Persian dominance. This wealth instantly transformed Alejandro from a king deep in debt to the richest man in the world, securing the financial foundation for the limitless expansion of his empire. The pursuit and the king. Dario III, having fled again, was now a king without an army or a capital, a fugitive in his own empire. Alejandro knew that the war could only end with the capture or death of Dario, the final living symbol of Persian resistance. He organized a rapid pursuit into the eastern Iranian provinces, a final chase that would define the next phase of his campaign, the relentless, personal hunt for the King of Kings across the remote edges of the world. Alejandro had now successfully replaced Dario. He had moved from Macedonian king to Lord of the Greeks, to Pharaoh of Egypto, and now irrevocably to the new King of Kings. His authority was no longer confined to the battlefield. It extended to the governance of millions and the assimilation of 2 massive civilizations. The majesty and the fire, Persepolis and the end of the King of Kings. Following the comprehensive, final military defeat of Dario III at Gaugamela, the path lay open to the symbolic, historical heart of the Persian Empire. Alejandro Magno marched rapidly eastward, securing the great administrative cities of Babylonia and Susa, claiming the vast imperial treasuries that instantly cemented his status as the wealthiest monarch in the world. Now, he approached the most potent symbol of Persian identity and pride, the majestic ceremonial capital of Persepolis. The capture of Persepolis, the symbol of empire. Persepolis was not merely a city, it was the ceremonial heart of the Achaemenid dynasty, built by its founders, Ciro and Dario I. It was here that the great kings held court and received tribute from all the subject nations. It was a site of colossal architecture, showcasing the absolute power and wealth of the Persian lineage through its magnificent palaces, terraces, and the grand gate of all nations. Alejandro faced a final, desperate line of defense, guarding the narrow pass leading to the city, the Puertas Persas, Persian gates. This pass was defended by Ariobarzanes, a Persian satrap who, utilizing the terrain's difficulty, inflicted heavy casualties on the Macedonians. The fighting was fierce, a final flicker of the old Persian pride. However, Alejandro, utilizing a strategy of envelopment, managed to circumvent the defenders, opening the path to the undefended capital. Entry and seizure. Alejandro entered Persepolis in 330 before the Common Era. The city's immense treasury, the last great reserve of the empire, was seized. This gold, which included the colossal tribute collected over 2 centuries, was so vast that it required thousands of mules and 5,000 camels to transport, permanently changing the scale of European and Mediterranean finances. The vengeance question. The most profound decision Alejandro made in Persepolis involved the city's majestic palace complex. For the Greek world, Persepolis represented the height of the enemy's arrogance, the symbolic opposite of Athens. Many Macedonian and Greek soldiers still carried the memory of the Persian king Xerxes' invasion of Greece a century and a half earlier, when he had sacked and burned the Athenian Acropolis. The burning of the palace, vengeance or madness? The question arose, should the centerpiece of Persian power, the vast palace of Xerxes, be spared or destroyed? The debate, some of Alejandro's advisors argued for restraint, urging him to preserve the palace to legitimize his succession, demonstrating that he was the true inheritor, not merely a destroyer. The decision, however, driven by a deep sense of historical vengeance and perhaps influenced by the presence of an Athenian courtesan, Thais, who urged the act as a reprisal for the Athenian sack, Alejandro made that irreversible choice. The act, in a moment of drunken theatrical abandon, a torch was applied to the massive wooden structure of the palace. The subsequent conflagration consumed the greatest architectural symbol of the Persian Empire. This act was deliberately designed to signal the end of the Achaemenid dynasty and the official completion of the Pan-Hellenic crusade of revenge. The burning of Persepolis marked a pivotal moment in Alejandro's campaign. On one hand, it satisfied the historical Greek mandate for retribution. On the other hand, it contradicted his emerging vision of himself as a cultural unifier and legitimate successor. The deliberate destruction of the palace was the final, definitive separation from the political goals inherited from his father's Pan-Hellenic League. It was now his empire, and he was free to pursue a destiny entirely his own. The final pursuit and the death of Dario III, with the Persian heartland occupied, the ultimate personal goal remained: the capture or death of Dario III, the last living king of kings. Dario had fled into the remote eastern provinces, desperately trying to rally the remaining forces of the empire. Alejandro realized that as long as Dario lived, he remained a potent symbol of resistance. He began a relentless, furious chase across the vast arid landscapes of Media and Parthia, demonstrating an endurance that pushed his army to its absolute limit. The speed of the chase. Alejandro abandoned the slow-moving phalanx and traditional baggage train, moving only with his elite cavalry and a small mobile contingent of infantry. The pursuit was a grueling testament to his personal will, often covering astonishing distances in days through brutal heat and demanding terrain. The betrayal. The chase was brought to an abrupt and tragic end, not by Alejandro, but by Beso, the Persian satrap of Bactria and one of Dario's own trusted relatives. Beso, realizing the finality of the defeat and seeking to position himself as the new leader of the Eastern resistance, decided to betray his king. The discovery. Alejandro finally caught up with the fugitive royal convoy in 330 before the Common Era, but Dario was already dead. He had been stabbed and left dying in a baggage cart by Beso and his conspirators. The end of the dynasty and the act of veneration. Alejandro arrived only moments after Dario's death. The sight of the fallen king of kings, a figure he had twice defeated but never personally captured, was deeply consequential for the Macedonian. Veneration and legitimacy. Alejandro treated Dario's corpse with the highest royal honors. He ordered that the body be transported back to Persepolis and interred in the royal tombs alongside his Achaemenid ancestors. This was not an act of mere respect. It was a profound political statement. By honoring the deceased king, Alejandro positioned himself not as a foreign destroyer, but as the legitimate avenging successor who had justly punished the traitors, Beso, who had murdered their own sovereign. The new identity. With Dario's death, the Pan-Hellenic War of Revenge was officially over. The stated goal of the invasion was achieved. Alejandro was now the sole master of the known world, and his campaign could no longer be justified as retribution. It transitioned into a mission of conquest for the sake of empire building and cultural fusion. He was no longer the leader of the Greek League. He was the king of kings, the successor to Quiro and Dario. Beso and the Eastern Challenge. The execution of Dario III by Beso created the final military challenge for Alejandro, the Eastern satrapies. Beso fled into the vast mountainous regions of Bactria and Sogdiana, declared himself the new Persian king, Artaxerxes V, and rallied the toughest, most independent tribes of the region to his banner. This meant the next phase of the campaign would be the most grueling of all. 3 years of brutal, grinding guerrilla warfare in the rugged, unforgiving terrain of modern Afghanistan and Central Asia. This was a war not against an organized army, but against fierce, elusive local resistance, fought in a landscape that tested the Macedonian military machine to its breaking point. More fundamentally, this new phase of the campaign would force Alejandro to accelerate his plan for cultural integration. To rule the East, he needed Eastern loyalty. This commitment to cultural fusion, however, would soon lead to the most dangerous division within his own army, the growing resentment of his lifelong Macedonian comrades. The external wars were ending, but the internal personal conflicts were just beginning, fueled by pride, tradition, and the unsettling demands of their ever-changing king. The shift in identity was about to cause a fracture that would forever scar the legacy of Alejandro Magno. The friction of fusion, Central Asia, internal conflict, and the death of a friend. With the ceremonial heart of the Persian Empire burned, and the King of Kings, Dario III, dead, Alejandro Magno stood as the undisputed ruler of the world, stretching from Greece to the Indus. Yet the campaign was far from over. The final, most brutal, and most personally taxing phase of his conquest lay in the remote, rugged eastern provinces of Bactria and Sogdiana, covering modern Afghanistan and Central Asia. The challenge of the eastern frontier, the pursuit of the traitor Beso, the satrap who had murdered Dario and proclaimed himself the new Persian king, Artaxerxes V, led Alejandro deep into the mountains and deserts of Central Asia. The nature of the war fundamentally changed here. This was not a confrontation with organized armies. It was a grueling, 3-year war of guerrilla resistance against fierce, highly mobile tribes led by local warlords, chief among them the brilliant Espetomenes. The terrain and tactics. The Macedonian army was designed for set-piece battles on open ground, relying on the decisive charge of the companion cavalry and the disciplined push of the phalanx. In Bactria and Sogdiana, they faced a devastating landscape of arid deserts, massive mountain ranges, and fortified crags. The native horsemen and tribesmen refused to offer battle, instead relying on hit-and-run attacks, poisoning wells, and utilizing the terrain to their absolute advantage. This frustrating, grinding warfare exacted a heavy toll on the Macedonian morale and resources. The capture of Beso. The pursuit of Beso was relentless. Eventually, Beso was betrayed by his own followers and handed over to the Macedonians. Alejandro ensured Beso was executed with calculated brutality, a clear message to the Persians that the murder of their legitimate king would not be tolerated. This act further solidified Alejandro's claim as the legitimate successor to Dario, the avenger of the Achaemenid line. The resistance of Espetomenes. Despite Beso's capture, the resistance continued under Espetomenes, a powerful local chieftain. Espetomenes proved to be a master of unconventional warfare, tying down and destroying multiple Macedonian detachments. To counter this, Alejandro had to fundamentally change his strategy. He fragmented his army into small, highly mobile detachments, built new military colonies, more cities named Alejandria, and engaged in the slow, painstaking process of pacification rather than outright destruction. The policy of cultural fusion, koine Hellenike. Alejandro recognized that these massive eastern satrapies could not be held purely by Macedonian force. True imperial rule required the cooperation and assimilation of the native Iranian nobility. This necessity drove Alejandro to accelerate a policy of cultural fusion that shocked and alienated his Macedonian veterans. Iranian administration, Alejandro began incorporating Persian nobles into his administration, appointing them to high positions, sometimes even as satraps. He respected the Persian system of governance and utilized local expertise rather than replacing all officials with Greeks. Persian dress and court customs. Most controversially, Alejandro began to adopt Persian court dress, the rich flowing robes and the diadem of the King of Kings, replacing the simple Macedonian military attire. He also began introducing the Persian custom of proskenosis, prostration or bowing down before the sovereign, a ritual considered mandatory in the Persian court, but utterly abhorrent to the free Greeks and Macedonians, who reserved such homage only for the gods. This adoption was deeply strategic. It validated his claim as Dario's true heir to the Iranian people and positioned him as a truly Eurasian monarch. To the fiercely traditional Macedonians, however, it looked like a terrifying descent into Oriental despotism, a betrayal of their hard-won Greek liberties, and a personal insult to their Macedonian pride. The rise of internal dissent, the friction between the king's vision of a multicultural empire and the Macedonian veterans' pride in their Greek heritage created an intense, dangerous atmosphere of dissent. The soldiers, who had fought and bled for years to avenge the Persian sacking of Greece, now watched their king adopt the very customs they had fought to destroy. The purity of the line. The old guard, represented by lifelong companions and officers from his father's era, believed they were fighting to establish Macedonian dominance. They resented the equal treatment of the barbarians and felt that their king was forgetting his true Macedonian roots and the sacrifices of his own people. The Page Plot. An early sign of this fracturing came with the Page Plot. A group of young royal pages, influenced by a dissenting philosopher and enraged by a personal slight from Alejandro, conspired to murder him. The plot was uncovered, and the pages, along with their suspected intellectual inspiration, were brutally executed. This event showed Alejandro that the threat to his life was no longer external, Persian, but internal, Macedonian. The tragedy of Cleto the Black, Cleto Melas. The internal tension reached its catastrophic climax in 328 before the Common Era, during a banquet in the city of Samarcanda, Maracanda. This incident involved Cleto the Black, Cleto Melas, the same officer who had saved Alejandro's life at the Rio Granico. The setting. The banquet was held in honor of the goddess Dionysus, the same ecstatic god revered by Alejandro's mother, Olympia. The mood was heavy, filled with wine, arrogance, and tension. Flatterers at the table began praising Alejandro, elevating his achievements above those of his own father, Felipe II, and openly comparing the king to the gods. Cleto's challenge. Cleto, a traditionalist and one of the veterans of Felipe's campaigns, found this impiety and flattery intolerable. In a drunken, furious rage, he spoke out. He defended the legacy of Felipe II, asserting that the true foundation of the current empire was laid by the old king, not by the young son. He mocked the adoption of Persian customs and bitterly recalled the day he saved Alejandro's life at the river, demanding to know if that life-saving debt had been forgotten in the haze of Persian adulation. The fatal blow. In a moment of absolute, unrestrained passion, a perfect example of the anger era Seneca warned against, Alejandro, who had been insulted both personally and politically, leaped up. His guards disarmed him and pulled him away, but in his blind fury, Alejandro seized a spear from one of the guards and thrust it through Cleto's body, killing his friend and lifesaver instantly. The aftermath and the growing isolation. The immediate aftermath was devastating. Alejandro was instantly consumed by grief and remorse. He locked himself away for 3 days, weeping and refusing to eat or drink, recognizing the catastrophic nature of the crime, a murder committed in a drunken rage against his most loyal, life-saving friend. The murder of Cleto was not just a personal tragedy, it was a seismic political event. It confirmed the deep, irreconcilable division within the army between the traditional Macedonian Old Guard and the young pro-fusion royalists. It exposed the terrifying fact that the king, the son of Zeus Ammon, was not immune to the destructive power of uncontrolled passion, proving that even divine confirmation could not guarantee moral self-mastery. It served as a clear, final warning to the remaining Macedonian veterans that dissent, however justified, would be met with instant, lethal force. Alejandro had now conquered the world, but in doing so, he had alienated his most trusted companions and committed an act that haunted his conscience. The external conquest of the eastern satrapies was finally concluding, culminating in his strategic marriage to the Bactrian princess Roxana. This marriage was the final indelible stamp on his policy of fusion, cementing his personal bond with the Iranian nobility. The vast Persian world was now his, but the cost was the purity of his Macedonian identity and the loyalty of his soul. With Central Asia finally subdued, the next and final destination lay beyond the Hindu Kush, a place of legend, India. The king who sought to conquer the world was now marching toward the literal end of the known earth, driven by an ambition that now knew no limits, not even the sensible counsel of his remaining friends. The end of the world, India, mutiny, and the final mystery in Babylonia. Having secured the vast eastern satrapies through brutal warfare and strategic marriage to Roxana, Alejandro Magno now fixed his gaze on the only unconquered lands remaining in his vision of universal empire, the mysterious, fabulously wealthy kingdoms beyond the Hindu Kush, the region known as India. The year was 327 before the Common Era. The campaign that followed would test his physical limits, expose the true cost of his ambition, and ultimately lead to the tragic end of his journey. The march into India, conquering the impossible. Alejandro believed that the world was relatively small and that beyond India lay the great outer ocean, the ultimate boundary of the earth. Driven by this intellectual curiosity and the relentless desire to achieve a glory that exceeded all previous heroes, he led his exhausted army across the treacherous passes of the Hindu Kush Mountains. The terrain and the resistance, the Indian campaign was an endless succession of arduous marches and fierce local resistance. Unlike the Persian Empire, India was a tapestry of decentralized kingdoms. Alejandro fought numerous small battles, demonstrating his mastery of siege warfare and mountain combat against formidable independent tribes. The Aornos Rock, a symbolic climax to this early phase, was the siege of the Aornos Rock, a natural fortress so sheer and inaccessible that local legend claimed even Heracles, Hercules, Alejandro's divine ancestor, had failed to conquer it. Alejandro, seeing this as a direct challenge to his divine lineage, mounted a massive, painstaking engineering effort to build ramps and fill ravines, eventually taking the fortress. He publicly affirmed his superiority to the ancient hero, further cementing his personal legend among his troops, though the effort exhausted them. The Battle of the Rio Hydaspes, 326 before the Common Era. The greatest challenge in India came on the banks of the Rio Hydaspes, Jhelum River, where Alejandro confronted the powerful local ruler, King Porus. Poro commanded a formidable army, famous for its massive war elephants, a terrifying mobile fortress that the Macedonian troops had never before encountered. The strategic crossing. Poro stood firm on the opposite bank, determined to prevent a crossing. Alejandro employed a masterpiece of deception and tactical genius. For weeks, he kept Poro guessing by making nightly feints at various points along the river. Finally, under the cover of a massive thunderstorm, he led a rapid, elite force many miles upstream and executed a surprise crossing. The Elephant Charge. The ensuing battle was one of the most difficult of the entire conquest. Poro's elephant corps was devastating, shattering the cohesion of the Macedonian cavalry. However, Alejandro countered with superior mobility and missile troops. He ordered his phalanx to absorb the shock, focusing on the elephants' handlers and disrupting their formations, eventually surrounding the beasts and driving them into a confused, panicking retreat that crushed their own infantry. The respect for Poro. Alejandro won the battle decisively. King Poro, despite his wounds, refused to flee and was captured. When brought before the Macedonian king, Alejandro asked him how he wished to be treated. Poro proudly replied, "Treat me, Alejandro, as a king." Alejandro, admiring his fierce courage and dignity, a stark contrast to the cowardice of Dario, not only spared Poro's life, but restored him to his throne, giving him a vast expansion of territory to govern as an ally. This act was crucial to Alejandro's policy of cultural fusion, showing that he honored virtue and loyalty above ethnic origin. The death of Bucephalus and the end of the road. The victory at the Hydaspes was bittersweet. During the campaign, Alejandro's beloved warhorse, Bucephalus, who had carried him faithfully from Pella to the Indus, finally succumbed to its wounds and old age. A shared history. The bond between Alejandro and Bucephalus was legendary. Alejandro had been the only one who could tame the massive, spirited stallion when he was a boy, and the horse had carried him through every single great battle. The City of Memory. Alejandro's reaction to the death of his horse was a profound demonstration of his deep personal passion. He mourned Bucephalus publicly and founded a city on the site of its death, naming it Bucephala, ensuring that the memory of his faithful companion would outlive the horse itself. This act, more than any decree, revealed the human heart beneath the crown of the world conqueror. The mutiny at the Rio Hephaestus. The army says no having defeated Poro, Alejandro intended to march further east, believing he was close to the limits of the earth. He was unaware of the vastness of the Indian subcontinent, or the strength of the Gungaridae and Prasian kingdoms that lay beyond. The limit reached. At the Rio Hephaestus, Baeus River, the Macedonian army finally reached its absolute psychological breaking point. For 8 continuous years, they had marched, fought, bled, and endured unimaginable hardships. They had crossed deserts, scaled mountains, battled war elephants, and faced every conceivable enemy. They heard rumors of even larger armies ahead and were simply too far from home. The mutiny, the soldiers, veterans of Felipe's original army, staged a mass refusal to cross the river. Their spokesman, Cano, delivered an emotional speech, pleading with Alejandro to consider their age, their fatigue, and the impossible distance to their homes in Macedonia. The king's isolation. Alejandro was furious. He raged against his men, calling them weak and ungrateful, threatening to march on alone. He shut himself in his tent for 3 days, refusing to speak, waiting for the army to break its silence and submit. The final decision, however, for the first time in his career, Alejandro's indomitable will was defeated not by an enemy, but by the collective, stubborn exhaustion of his own men. He conceded defeat. He ordered the construction of 12 massive symbolic altars at the Hephaestus, marking the farthest extent of his journey and his triumph. The conquest was over. The disastrous retreat and the final years. The return journey was catastrophic. Refusing to simply retrace their steps, Alejandro decided on a dangerous, exploratory route, the fleet and the march. He built a massive fleet and sailed down the Rio Indo to the sea, splitting his army into 2 parts, a naval contingent and the mainland army, which he personally led through the terrifying, unforgiving Gedrosian Desert, modern Makran deserts. The trial of Gedrosia. The march through Gedrosia was a deliberate act of shared suffering and penance, designed to punish and unify the army after the mutiny. It proved to be a disaster worse than any battle. Thousands died from thirst, heat exhaustion, and starvation. The discipline that had defined the army broke down, and only the sheer force of Alejandro's personal leadership prevented total collapse. He reportedly refused water when his soldiers found a small ration for him, sharing their suffering and earning back some of their lost loyalty. The reforms, the tensions, and the death in Babylonia, Alejandro finally returned to the imperial capitals, spending his final years in Susa and Babylonia. His focus shifted entirely from conquest to organization, integration, and preparation for future ventures, including a possible invasion of Arabia. The fusion policy finalized. He ordered the mass marriages at Susa, 324 before the Common Era, commanding 80 of his senior officers to marry Iranian noblewomen, while he himself married a second Persian princess, Barsina. This was the definitive act of fusion, aiming to create a new Eurasian ruling class. The veteran crisis. This policy, combined with the earlier adoption of Persian dress, led to the mutiny at Opis, where 10,000 Macedonian veterans demanded their discharge and insulted the king for favoring Persians. Alejandro responded with a mix of ruthlessness and charisma, eventually winning them back, but demonstrating the permanent, unfixable fracture in his army. The final mystery. In Babylonia, in the summer of 323 before the Common Era, Alejandro Magno suddenly fell ill after a long, drunken banquet. After 10 days of excruciating fever, he died at the age of 32. The cause of his death remains one of history's great, enduring mysteries. Was it poison, administered by resentful officers, possibly connected to Antipatro, the powerful regent in Macedonia? Was it a complication of the malaria or typhoid fever that plagued Mesopotamia? Or was it simply the complete, final physical collapse of a body worn out by years of relentless warfare, drinking, and numerous battle wounds? The enduring legacy Alejandro Magno died without naming a clear successor. When asked on his deathbed who should inherit his vast empire, he is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." This single phrase unleashed 50 years of brutal warfare among his generals, the Diadochos, who ultimately fragmented the empire into several powerful Hellenistic kingdoms, Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Asia, etc. Yet the fragmentation of the political empire did not erase the cultural revolution he had engineered. Alejandro's true legacy was not the physical empire, but the Hellenistic age itself. He permanently spread Greek language, culture, and science across the Near East and Central Asia. He created a vast, unified economic and intellectual zone, allowing for the explosive growth of trade and knowledge. He proved that the boundaries of the world were not fixed, and that cultural integration was possible on a massive scale. Alejandro Magno remains history's most profound study in untrammeled ambition, a man driven by the complex forces of mythological heroism, philosophical training, and a dangerous, undeniable sense of divine destiny. He remains the flawed hero, the brilliant strategist, and the king who conquered the known world only to be defeated by the vastness of the unknown, the limits of his own men, and ultimately the final, fatal fever of his own worn-out body. His life, a blazing comet across the ancient world, permanently linked East and West, creating a world irrevocably different from the one he was born into.